The first rule of early retirement is supposed to be relax, right? You're supposed to take up golf, or bird watching, or maybe buy a boat you'll only use twice a year. But for guys like me, guys who spent 20 years wiring the nervous systems of Fortune 500 companies and sweating over server racks that cost more than a small island, relaxation feels a lot like dying. My name is Simon Vance, and I didn't retire to play bridge. I retired to optimize, to fix things that broken systems ignore, which is why my garage isn't filled with lawnmowers or half-finished woodworking projects. It's filled with 11.7 kilowatts of humming, liquid-cooled computing power that serves exactly one purpose: keeping the traffic lights on Elm and Main from turning my morning coffee run into a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. To the outside world, specifically the beige-obsessed residents of Oakwood Terrace, I was just the quiet guy in the house with the slightly too large satellite dish, a guy who didn't plant enough marigolds and whose air conditioning unit seemed to run with a suspicious, low-frequency thrum. And to Patricia Gables, the HOA president and self-appointed warden of suburban mediocrity, I was a glitch in her matrix, a stain on her perfect, color-coded spreadsheet of a neighborhood. Patricia, or Patty, as she insisted, though there was nothing casual about her, ruled Oakwood Terrace with a clipboard in one hand and a laminated copy of the bylaws in the other, patrolling the sidewalks like a shark in a pantsuit, measuring grass height with a ruler she kept in her purse. I watched her sometimes from my command center, a bank of 6 monitors glowing cool blue against the soundproofed walls of my garage, tracking her movements on my perimeter cameras not out of fear, but out of data collection, because in my world, data is the only weapon that matters. On a Tuesday that felt like the humidity was trying to drown us, I saw her stop in front of the Petersons' house, shaking her head at their new rose bushes because they were a shade of crimson that apparently screamed rebellion instead of compliance. And I knew, just from the tilt of her head, that she was looking for a new target. My system hummed, a gentle, reassuring vibration that meant the dedicated fiber line I'd paid the city to install under the guise of a sewage upgrade was feeding real-time telemetry to the ancient, crumbling traffic grid downtown, adjusting signal timing by milliseconds to let a heavy logging truck pass through without braking, saving the city fuel and frustration without them ever knowing I was the ghost in their machine. Then my email pinged, a jarring sound in the sanctuary. It was the weekly Oakwood Terrace blast, a digital scroll of passive-aggressive judgment, reminding us that trash cans visible from the street were a moral failing and that utility decorum was now a priority. I leaned back in my errand chair, reading that phrase again, utility decorum, and a slow smile spread across my face because I knew exactly what that meant. It meant she heard the hum. It meant she saw the conduit running from the pole to my garage, and it meant she was coming for my power. She didn't know it yet, but she was picking a fight with a man who buys electricity by the megawatt and views impossible as a dare. The first shot wasn't fired with a gun, but with a certified letter, the kind that requires a signature and ruins your whole afternoon. I was out in the driveway with Buck, my contractor, a guy built like a vending machine with a cigar permanently glued to his lip, discussing the trenching for the new geothermal cooling system I needed to keep my servers from melting through the concrete floor. The mail carrier looked apologetic as he handed me the envelope, and I ripped it open right there, the paper feeling heavy and expensive. Notice of violation. It read in bold, angry font, citing Bylaw 19 regarding unapproved landscaping and Bylaw 31 regarding unauthorized industrial operations. It demanded I cease and desist all digging immediately, refill the trench, and pay a fine of $200 a day until my property was returned to its original, harmonious state, complete with blurry, zoomed-in photos of Buck's truck taken from Patty's second-story window. I handed the letter to Buck, who squinted at it through the smoke of his cigar, grunting, "Industrial operations? Simon, I'm digging a hole for a pipe, not fracking for oil." "She's wound tight, Buck," I said, looking up at Patty's window where the blinds twitched just enough to let me know she was watching. "She thinks the internet runs on magic and that my server rack is a threat to her property values. So we pack it up?" Buck asked, hand on the excavator key. "No," I said, and I felt that old spark, the one I hadn't felt since my corporate takeover days, ignite in my chest. "We accelerate." She quoted bylaws. "Buck, she wants a paper war? I'm going to give her a paper apocalypse." That night, I didn't touch the traffic grid. I didn't optimize a single line of code. Instead, I wrote a 27-page response that was a masterpiece of bureaucratic judo. I didn't just argue. I overwhelmed. I cited Bylaw 22, Section G, the Green Energy Initiative clause the board had passed 3 years ago to look progressive, explicitly permitting utility upgrades that reduce carbon footprints. I attached my city permits, all 4 of them, stamped and notarized. I included a letter from the power company confirming my dedicated line didn't touch the neighborhood load. I even threw in a privacy statute regarding unauthorized photography of private residences, just to twist the knife. I bound it in a glossy folder, sent it certified mail to every board member, and waited. The fallout was immediate and beautiful. The next morning, I watched on my monitors as 3 board members practically ran to Patty's house, waving my dossier like it was a grenade that had just landed in their living room. She had been outmaneuvered on paper, her authority checked by the very rules she claimed to worship, and I just knew, that a person like Patty doesn't take a loss like that and learn from it. She gets desperate. She started the Whisper campaign 2 days later. I watched her go door to door, skipping my house obviously, but hitting Dave next door, a chill guy who designs video games and hates yard work as much as I do. I cranked up the gain on the parabolic mic I'd disguised as a garden gnome near the property line. Don't judge me. Information is power, and listened. It's a data farm, David. Patty's voice was a frantic hiss. He's mining crypto or hosting illegal servers. Have you heard the hum? It's radiation. It's destabilizing the grid. My toaster took 3 minutes to brown bread this morning. 3 minutes. He's sucking the juice right out of our walls. Dave, bless his heart, just stared at her and said, Patty, my AC unit is louder than his garage, and maybe your toaster is just old, before closing the door in her face. But she found traction with Gerald down the street, a nervous man who treated next-door posts like gospel. I heard them talking about throbbing cables and fire hazards, spinning a narrative where I was some kind of techno-villain plotting to melt the subdivision. They called an emergency meeting for Thursday night. I walked into the clubhouse at 6:59 p.m., pushing a cart with my own projector and laptop, looking like I was there to teach a seminar on corporate synergy. The room was packed with about 15 people, mostly the board and the terrified, with Patty sitting center stage like a judge at a tribunal. Mr. Vance, she barked, banging a gavel she definitely brought from home. This is a meeting to discuss your flagrant disregard for community safety, specifically the industrial noise and the catastrophic strain you are placing on our grid. I brought slides, I said, plugging in. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just projected a decibel chart showing my garage was quieter than the ambient noise of crickets. Then I showed the letter from the city engineer. And finally, the kill shot. A graph showing that my geothermal upgrade would actually lower the neighborhood's thermal footprint, technically increasing everyone's property value by a fraction of a percent. So, I concluded, looking around the silent room, not only am I not straining the grid, I have my own dedicated feed from the substation, meaning if the power goes out, I'm the only one who stays on. Any questions? Patty turned a shade of purple I've only seen on bruised fruit. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then slammed the gavel down. This meeting is adjourned. But this is not over, Mr. Vance. You cannot buy your way out of the rules. I didn't buy anything, Patty, I said, packing up. I just read the fine print. I thought that was the end of it, but I underestimated the depths of her obsession. She tried to call the cops the next day, claiming I was a cyber terrorist hacking the traffic lights. Officer Higgins, a man who looked like he was 1 week away from retirement and entirely done with suburban drama, showed up with a rookie named Diaz. I invited them in, gave them coffee, and showed them the binder, my transparency log. Higgins looked at the city commendation letter I'd received for untangling the Christmas parade gridlock last year. He looked at the server racks. He looked at me. So, let me get this straight, Higgins sighed, rubbing his temples. You're running a volunteer traffic control optimization center out of your garage because you hate traffic. Inefficiency offends me, Sergeant. He chuckled, closing the binder. We got a call about a national security threat. I'm seeing a guy with too much time and money. Ma'am, he turned to Patty, who was hovering at the end of the driveway like a vulture. Stop calling 911 unless something is on fire. This man is cleaner than a church on Sunday. As they drove away, Patty stood there, vibrating with rage. She marched up to the edge of the trench Buck had just finished digging, toes hanging over the edge of my property line. "You think you're smart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You think you can just hum away in there with your machines. But you need power, Simon. You love your power." "It's not just my power, Patty," I said, my voice dropping, losing all the humor. "That conduit is municipal infrastructure. You touch it, and you're not fighting an HOA bylaws violation. You're committing a felony. Federal-level stuff. Don't do it." She looked at the thick, armored cable running into the side of my house, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous, unstable light. "I will shut you down," she said, "one way or another." She stormed off, and Buck, who had been watching from the excavator cab, leaned out. "Boss, that lady ain't right. You want me to park the backhoe in front of the junction box?" "No." "Buck," I said, looking at the darkening sky where a storm front was rolling in, heavy and bruised. "Let her try? I have redundancies for my redundancies." The storm hit around 11 p.m., lashing rain against the garage door, thunder rattling the windows. I was in the command center, monitoring the flow of traffic on the wet streets, when a motion alert popped up on monitor 4. It was her. She was wearing a yellow raincoat, hood up, creeping along the fence line like a cat burglar. In her hand, glinting in the lightning flashes, was a pair of bolt cutters, the big kind, the kind you use to cut padlocks off storage units. My heart hammered, not with fear, but with a grim, icy anticipation. She was actually going to do it. She was going to try to murder the grid. I watched as she approached the heavy junction box on the side of my house. She struggled with the leverage, bracing her foot against the brick, fitting the jaws of the cutter around the main feed cable. I could have run out there. I could have stopped her. But you can't save someone who is determined to jump off a cliff. You can only make sure you aren't tied to them when they fall. She squeezed. There was a blinding flash of blue-white light, a shower of sparks that lit up the backyard like the 4th of July, and then darkness. My garage went black. The hum died. The silence was sudden and absolute. Then, the red emergency lights kicked on, bathing the room in a submarine glow. A synthesized voice announced, "Main power loss detected. Grid stability, 0. Initiating Protocol Omega in T-minus 60 seconds. Protocol Omega. The failsafe I built for earthquakes, for solar flares, for the end of the world. Or for Patty." I looked at the countdown. 60 seconds. That was too long. "Override," I said to the empty room. I flipped the safety cover on the big red switch on my console. Yes, I installed a big red switch. I'm a nerd, sue me, and slammed it down. From the backyard shed, a deep, guttural roar erupted. My 500 horsepower diesel generator kicked over, shaking the floorboards. The transfer switch slammed home with a metallic thunk that sounded like a prison door closing. Power flooded back into the system. The monitors flickered and blazed to life. The servers spun up, whining like jet engines before settling back into their steady hum. The traffic grid stabilized. I was back online. But Patty was about to have a very different experience. See, Protocol Omega wasn't just about keeping my lights on. I had discovered a vulnerability in the neighborhood's smart meter firmware months ago, a backdoor used for load balancing. I never used it, because that would be unethical. But now that the grid had been physically attacked, the system interpreted the surge as a catastrophic failure and entered emergency load shedding and redistribution mode. Translation: I could control where the power went. I pulled up the neighborhood map on my screen. Green dots for houses with power, red for those without. I typed in a command. Prioritize, Vance residents. Mode, cyclic surge. This wasn't hacking. This was aggressive diagnostics. I sent a pulse of power to her house. Not enough to blow anything, but enough to confuse every smart device she owned. I switched the camera view to her house. She was standing in her driveway, rain soaking her, looking at the blackened scorch mark on the wall, probably wondering why she wasn't dead. Then, her house came alive. Her smart lights began to strobe, on, off, in a frantic disco rhythm. Her garage door started opening and closing, like a hungry mouth. And then, the piece de resistance. Her high-end, Wi-Fi-enabled outdoor sound system, which she usually used to play soft classical music to annoy the teenagers, crackled to life. But it wasn't playing Mozart. Because of the voltage irregularity, It defaulted to its factory test loop. It was polka. Loud, brassy, aggressive polka music, blasting into the stormy night at maximum volume. Papa, papa. I watched as she scrambled backward, slipping in the mud. She ran to her front door, but her smart lock was cycling too fast to engage. She was locked out. She ran to her car, but the garage door was doing its chattering dance, effectively barring her entry. She was trapped in her driveway, in the rain, being serenaded by an accordion nightmare while her house flashed like a rave. The neighbors' lights flickered on. My generator was feeding back into the local loop just enough to keep Dave and the nice folks across the street online, and people started stepping out onto their porches. What is going on? I heard Dave yell over the polka. She cut the line. I shouted from my open garage door, pointing at the sparking junction box. She tried to sabotage the grid. And then, the sirens. Because when you cut a main municipal power feed, you don't just annoy a nerd. You trip alarms at the power company and the police station. Officer Higgins and Rookie Diaz rolled up, lights flashing, adding to the strobe effect. They stepped out into the rain, looked at the sparking cable, looked at the strobe light house, listened to the polka music, and then looked at Patty, who was sitting in a puddle, sobbing, holding a pair of half-melted bolt cutters. I didn't mean to, she shrieked as Higgins approached her. It was supposed to just stop the humming. Ma'am, Higgins said, his voice weary but loud over the tuba solo. Drop the cutters. You're under arrest for felony destruction of utility property, reckless endangerment, and, honestly, disturbing the peace. They cuffed her right there in the rain. She looked at me as they walked her past my driveway. I stood in the warm, dry glow of my garage, holding a mug of coffee, the servers humming happily behind me. I told you, Patty, I said, just loud enough for her to hear. Do not touch the power. The aftermath was what you'd call a total system reset. Patty faced charges. Serious ones. The power company doesn't play around, and neither does the DA when you endanger neighborhood infrastructure. She ended up pleading out, paying a massive fine, and selling her house to cover the legal bills and the damages. She moved 3 towns over, to a place where I assume the HOA is much, much stricter. The neighborhood? It flourished. Dave took over as HOA president and immediately dissolved the aesthetics committee. People planted whatever flowers they wanted. The utility decorum bylaw was framed and burned at a block party. As for me, I'm still here. The city actually hired me as a consultant to upgrade the rest of the grid. Turns out, having a guy who can keep the lights on during a sabotage attempt is valuable. Buck finished the geothermal system, so my energy bills are non-existent now. And every now and then, when the traffic is flowing smooth on Elm Street and the servers are purring like kittens, I pull up the old security footage of that night. I watch the lights flash, I listen to the faint strains of polka music in the rain, and I remind myself of the most important lesson of the digital age. You can mess with the man, you can mess with the house, but you never, ever mess with the system administrator's uptime. So, tell me in the comments, was the polka music too much, or was it the perfect soundtrack for justice? And if you've got an HOA horror story, drop it down below. I might just read it on the next stream. Stay wired, everyone, and keep your lights on.